obesity is a risk factor for cancer, cardiovascular disease, and Alzheimer, almost disappears compared to 30 years of aging. And that's why, I know the mentality is about weight, but weight is just, in fact, a minor component in compared to the power of aging.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
The world needs evidence-based public policy now more than ever. Making the right decisions should not be partisan politics. Please help spread The Rational View by going to patron.podbean.com/The Rational View. Together, we can make a better future. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. In this episode, I'm continuing my investigations into the science of nutrition and health. Today, I'm looking at the effect that diet has on longevity. We know that eating poorly can kill you in any number of ways, but is there a fountain of youth out there? Can we extend our lifetime, our lifespans, merely by choosing the right foods? My guest today will have something to say on the topic. I hope you enjoy the interview. If you like what you're hearing, please press like on your podcast app. It really helps the ratings if you can do that. And if you're interested to learn more, to chat and have more in-depth conversations, I urge you to come and visit us on the Rational View Facebook group and post your questions, and I'll try to answer them. Dr. Valter Longo has 30 years of experience in the field of longevity and healthy eating. He's the director of the Longevity Institute at the University of Southern California Leonard Davis School of Gerontology, Los Angeles, and the director of the Longevity and Cancer Program at the Italian Foundation for Cancer Research Institute of Molecular Oncology in Milan, Italy. He's the author of the bestseller, The Longevity Diet, and the two Italian books, now forgive my pronunciation here, Alla tavola della longevità, At the Table of Longevity, and La longevità inizia da bambini, Longevity Begins in Childhood.
It's pretty good.
Thank you. Professor Longo is also the scientific director of the Create Cures Foundation and the Valter Longo Foundation. In 2018, Time magazine named Professor Longo as one of the 50 most influential people in healthcare for his research on fasting-mimicking diets as a way to improve health and prevent diseases. Dr. Longo, welcome to The Rational View.
Well, thanks for having me.
So, could you tell us a little bit about your background? I read somewhere online that you actually came to the United States to become a rock star. How did you end up as an expert on longevity?
Yes, so I came to play rock guitar, and but then I ended up studying jazz guitar at the University of North Texas. Was one of the leading jazz programs in the United States in near Dallas. Okay. And then they asked me to direct the marching band, and I said there is no way I'm directing marching band. And it was the second year of my music program. And then I immediately thought, I got to study aging. And then I thought, well, chemistry and biology must be good, fields to learn to study aging. And so I enrolled in the biochemistry program to the surprise of the chairman of the department, who said, you're a music student and you want to study biochemistry of aging.
That's a big difference.
And never having taken a class in biology.
Wow. So we have a particular band director to thank for your current work. So you've been obviously studying longevity for a long time. You've become an expert. You're a director of several important research groups. What do we know now about the causes of aging? What have we learned about what causes aging, and how, why we believe we can back it up or reverse it? Yeah.
So for the longest time, it was just a lot. I mean, I think for thousands of years, right? There's a lot of speculation of why we age. And then eventually in the 1990s, I think a group of mostly people in the United States, including my own lab and my own work at UCLA and then at USC, identified genes that control the aging process. Like, what does it mean? We went to simple organisms. Some people went to the worms, to the fruit flies. Some people went to, in my case, yeast, a unicellular organism. And then we did a lot of genetic work and just asked the question, can I make this organism live longer? And what is the gene that allows the organism to live longer, right? So we did that in yeast and identified two pathways. One we call the sugar pathway, one we call the protein pathway, the amino acid pathway. And that we could make the yeast live 5 times longer, 500% increase in lifespan. And then if we starve them, we make them live 10 times longer, right? So then that sort of began to underscore the importance of nutrition. And because all the genes that were making the simple organism live a lot longer had to do with food and with what we call nutrient signaling pathways. And the same was true for worms. Cynthia Kenyon, Tom Johnson, and others were working on that, and fruit flies, Mark Taylor and Linda Partridge and others showing the same. And then Andrei Barkey and John Kopchik doing the same in mice. And so everything converged in this nutrient signaling pro-growth pathways seem to accelerate the aging process. And this is very consistent. And then eventually we did the work in humans in Ecuador and confirming that this was probably from yeast to all the way to people. And so, so I think that was some of the proof. I mean, of course, the ideas were there for a long time, but the proof was like, okay, I mutate this gene, and then all these organisms live longer and healthier, by the way.
Why on earth would there be such a heavily conserved gene that creates aging and kills us sooner?
Yeah, killing us sooner, it's something that I argued, and everybody to this day is against me for this, right? So I argued altruistic death, right? And the existence of altruistic death in simple organisms. I didn't argue that men have that, but I said it's clearly there in nature. So that's a different story, right? So most people disagree with that, and I think it's a possibility, but everybody else doesn't think that. Instead, I think that the idea would be that there are different modalities, right? So let's say that the body can switch to, let's say, an hibernation mode, right? And in this hibernation mode, you could live a lot longer. And this was probably an evolved process, right? That make you age more slowly under certain conditions, right? So, a mouse lives for 2 years, a person lives for 80, 85 years. That's a 44-fold or whatever difference. How do we develop that? And so, is it possible that, in fact, the mouse has a modality in which they can live for 4 years? And we just sort of tapped into it, right? So we found the genetic mutations that can switch the mice into this longer-lived modality, and not so much got rid of a killing gene that was there to make him live longer.
Is it possible that these genes are associated with some significant benefit to the organism? You say that they're associated with food, and so maybe it's a metabolism link thing that makes you more energetic, but because you're more energetic, you break down faster. Is that something that people would believe?
Or even more fundamental than that, right? It's growth and reproduction, right? So you're trading off something that historically is at the very center of evolution. And so the force of natural selection would be extremely high to make you grow to a normal size and to make you highly reproductive. So evolution doesn't really care about the soma, the disposable soma, let's say. And so we're just a carrier of the genetic material. And so, there is, if the modality of making you grow fast and reproduce fast works, then leave it alone, because that's much more flexible. They can adjust to COVID. They can adjust to almost everything out there. But if that's not available, you're starving, you don't have enough, nutrients to grow and reproduce, then there is no choice but stand by, try to live as long as possible, protect the DNA as long as possible, so that when the food comes back around, you have that opportunity.
I see. That makes sense. So, talking about your research on yeast, which you mentioned, I read somewhere you said that withholding food completely reprogrammed the yeast. Now, when I heard these words from online, the words completely reprogrammed in a single-celled organism, I think DNA, but of course we know that DNA itself doesn't change. I assume you may be talking here about epigenetics and how methylation of the DNA affects the expression of certain genes. Is that, I've heard of that being associated with aging in a lot of other contexts. Is that what you mean when you say that the withholding of food completely reprogrammed the yeast?
Yes. So it could be epigenetic. It doesn't have to be. You can also be sort of metabolically and functionally reprogrammed, so that you have, again, so for example, we've always known that yeast have three modalities. One is the high growth, high reproduction. Two is called stationary phase. You live a couple of weeks. In this high reproduction mode or high growth, you live for maybe 3 or 4 days. Then you have something called stationary phase, and they live for a couple of weeks. Then you have something called the spore state. And in the spore state, they can go 2 years, right? So it's about 100-fold difference between the high growth, high reproductive rate, and that's always been around, right? So then, there's probably epigenetic changes, but there is also probably just different orders, meaning that the nutrients are sending signals to the cell, and the cell can decide which program to enter, and then it's still not quite fully understood how much the methylation and acetylation, etc., are controlling this. But most likely, there is at least some of this is controlled by epigenetic changes.
So you've been associated with fasting as kind of your research has looked into fasting mimicking diets, and you've done some work on popularizing particular approaches to fasting. Can you explain why fasting has these effects? Why is it good for you? How does it help yeast? How does it help people?
Yeah, so fasting, I always say fasting means everything and nothing, meaning that it's very similar to eating, right? So is eating good for you? Some forms of eating is good for you. Some forms are very bad for you. And that's the same for fasting. So I think in general, though, fasting is the starvation conditions, as I was saying earlier, whether it was a bacteria, some of my early work was in starving bacteria, then starving people and mice with Roy Walford at UCLA, and then starving yeast. And I sort of went back, went from bacteria to human and back to yeast. So the starvation as a fundamental gives a fundamental order to any organism, which is what I said earlier. You can't grow, you can't reproduce. There is just not enough energy and building blocks to do so. And so stand by. Right? So that's why really a lot of this work on what's called calorie restriction. And calorie restriction is something that's been studied for over 100 years, right? So what happens to humans or mice if you reduce the calorie about 25% below the normal level, right? And this has been studied for a long time. And there's a lot of support of this calorie restriction intervention. But its origin probably has to do with starvation, real starvation. So meaning that upon starvation, every organism gets reprogrammed and knows exactly what to do, and it goes into this shielded, highly protected mode, and it stands by. Now, we have to tap into that, right, without sacrificing the things that we do want to do. So, for example, most people don't reproduce their entire life, right? So why then are we investing all this energy into reproductive systems and reproductive system function when we use that maybe 2 or 3 times in a life if we do that? So then couldn't we divert that energy towards protection and regeneration and rejuvenation, and away from reproductive systems, right? And just allow them to stand by, just like they are during starvation, right? So these are some of the things that starvation triggers, and that's why but starvation can also kill people if you go long enough. And so when then you have to know exactly. This is why we really like this temporary intervention, right? You intervene for a few days and then you go back to normal, right? Is that enough to reset the system, maybe epigenetically, but not just epigenetically, also with stem cells and with other changes in the body that they last a long time.
I see. So yeah, the intermittent fasting of which we've heard so much is so that you get the benefits of the cellular changes without the drawbacks of actually starving yourself to death. So yeah, that was something I was going to ask is, yes, there are benefits, but there are also potential drawbacks. Do we have, a good idea that this is on the whole beneficial to the body, or is there scientific research that has been done to show that intermittent fasting is healthier than not, for example?
Yes. So intermittent fasting refers to lots of different things, right? And I think some of them have evidence suggesting they're good, and some of them have evidence suggesting they're not so good. And so if you look at all the types, I'm a fan of two things. One is what's called time-restricted eating. Sachin Panda and others have pioneered this. And I really like these 12 hours a day of fasting, maybe 12 to 13 hours. And I think that's where it's starting to show the 13 hours, a lot of effects, right? So if you fast for 13 hours a day, then you get lots of benefits in sleep, in metabolism, et cetera, et cetera. So I really like that. As you go longer, then you start having problem with feasibility. I mean, most people don't like that. It interferes with their life. But also you started to see problems. You start seeing gallstone formation increase, gallbladder operation increase. You see the people that skip breakfast, they tend to live shorter. They tend to have more cardiovascular disease, right? So and this is meta-analysis. I rarely talk about one study. I always talk about the general consensus if you look at the data. So the data over and over and over shows that breakfast skippers don't do very well. And the argument is like, breakfast skippers also have poor habits. But we can argue all day, but that doesn't take away the fact that the breakfast skippers don't do so well. So maybe not such a good idea to skip breakfast and do fasting for 16 hours, right? So 12, 13 hours, stick with that. And that's number one. And then number two is, what I, of course, develop in my own lab is fasting-mimicking diets. What if once every 3 months or 4 months, you undergo this 5-day fasting period, but you do it with a fasting mimicking diet, a plant-based fasting mimicking diet, and you do it for 5 days, and then you go back to whatever it is that you did before. Of course, that's my favorite. And why is that? Well, because I think it does a lot of the things that I talked about, the resetting. Clearly, we see in mice very strong epigenetic reprogramming. So we see these Yamanaka factors and all these embryonic markers, developmental markers, turned on, right? So as the mouse, but we're pretty sure that at some point it's a very fundamental property of systems. So in the mouse, basically the mouse organs shrink, and then you see these embryonic factors, these Yamanaka factors turned on, and then the stem cells stand by, and then during the refeeding, these reprogrammed cells and these stem cells, they go to work and they help the organ regenerate or partially regenerate. Right? So, and this happens, we've shown in the blood, in the pancreas, in the gut. We see evidence of that in the nervous system. So it looks like it's happening everywhere. And so this time-restricted eating and then these periodic fasting mimicking diets, I think they're, because of safety and because of efficacy, they seem to be very, very good. And of course, now we run a lot of clinical trials on the fasting mimicking diet. I think there's probably at least 10 clinical trials that are being completed, both on cancer, on normal people, on diabetes patients, etc. So that's I particularly like things that are being clearly tested and shown to be safe. And also the fasting mimicking diet is now being done by over 1 million people that we know of. with very few reports of safety concerns.
How much fasting do you need to make a difference in your health? Is there some sort of scientific consensus on, we're having some epigenetic resets going on? How long does that last? How often should you do it? How often is too often?
Yeah, first of all, I think the fasting mimicking diet, you should do it when you need to do it, right? So if somebody is 22, has perfect health, runs 30 miles a week, does a lot of weight training, et cetera, has a perfect everyday diet, you might need to do it. And let's say your BMI, very low BMI, like 20, you probably do it once a year, and that's it. Now, most people in Europe, the United States, we have 50 to 72% overweight and obesity, and lots of other problems, inflammatory, and just a poor diet that accelerates aging and age-related damage. So yeah, in that case, I think 3 to 4 times a year or more. Like, for example, in the diabetes trials, I was part of 2 diabetes trials done in Holland and Germany. And in both of them, it was done once a month in the diabetes patients, right? So these were overweight or obese diabetes patients. And so they received it either for 6 months, once a month, or for 12 months, once a month. Now, the beauty, they were, for example, able to reduce, they were 7 times more likely to reduce drug use if they were on the fasting mimicking diet than if they were not, right? So this was very, very interesting. Both trials indicated the same, that, if you're starting from a bad point, baseline, obesity or overweight and diabetes, now these monthly cycles are very important. Yeah, so then that's the range, right? So once a year to once a month. But then that doesn't mean that the diabetic patients are going to continue with once a month, right? So the idea is that year 2, maybe they do it once every 2 months. In year 3, they do it every 3 or 4 months, and then, they use it to stay in the healthy status, and of course, I'm talking about weight now, but aging and the effect on aging is much more powerful than even weight, right? So the weight is a bonus, let's say, right? The more important reprogramming or effects are having to do with making the system younger.
So I've heard criticisms about fasting, in that maybe the only positive effect is the weight loss. Is it clear that you're getting more than just the health effects of losing weight from these fasting diets? Is there evidence that can differentiate these 2 effects?
Yeah, there's a ton of evidence in many different fields, right? So, for example, even in cancer, right? So, of course, there's hundreds of studies in mice, but let's say just talk about clinical trials, right? In the clinical trials, for example, with women with breast cancer, there is a 3-fold increase in the decrease in the non-responders to chemotherapy in the women that are doing the fasting mimicking diet together with the chemotherapy. So it's clear, anti-cancer effect. Of course, we're just starting, but these are randomized clinical trials with 125 people. And it's the same for diabetes, right? These are not ideas in just mouse studies. So we need to do more, of course, but you're starting to see anti-inflammatory effects independent of weight, anti-aging effects independent of weight, anti-cancer effect independent of weight, cognitive effects independent of weight. So yeah, it's a lot of things that are, in fact, in some cases we even calculated there was independent of weight. So we can do correlation studies and say the people that lose more weight are the ones that are benefiting the most. And often we see that that's not the case. Probably has to do much more with reprogramming and rejuvenating systems than weight. But weight is important, right? So, being overweight and obese is clearly a factor. So I'm not discounting it. But, if you look at, I always show one slide, and I show cancer, cardiovascular disease, and Alzheimer. And I showed weight is a risk factor for these, right? And it's one of the major risk factors. And then I show it against 30 years of aging, and it almost disappears, right? Obesity is a risk factor for cancer, cardiovascular disease, and Alzheimer, almost disappears compared to 30 years of aging. And that's why, I know the mentality is about weight, but weight is just, a component, but in fact, a minor component in compared to the power of aging.
So what do you think the impact of these fasting diets can be on lifespan? You use the name prolon for your diet, and I assume it means promoting longevity, or is it Professor Longo?
That's a good one. I never heard believe it or not, all these years, and this is the first time somebody says prolon, Professor Longo. Yeah, that's a good one. It's I cannot endorse products, so unfortunately I cannot even talk about that. But I started a company many years ago. I donate 100%. I don't take money from the company. I donate 100% of the shares. I already started donating to the foundation and research, and I will donate 100% of them. So I don't make a penny out of any of this. But I thought it was important, and I thought it was important and I got criticized for it, and that's okay. I'm not that worried about it. And I thought it was important to, get it out there, get it in the hospitals, get it in people's hands, and have it standardized. And why is this? Because every 50 years or so, people get excited about fasting, and then some people end up dying or being hurt by it, by doing it improvised and doing it in wrong ways. And so I thought that if we wanted to, for the first time in history, to make this as part of the toolkit of a physician, but also a toolkit of every household. Somebody says, okay, now I want to do something. There's a lot of crazy ideas out there, but there's some that are not crazy ideas and have been tested in many clinical trials, hundreds of preclinical studies. And that's where this packaged fasting-mimicking diet come in. And I would say the one of the biggest surprises to me was the enthusiasm of my colleagues in initiating clinical studies. So they basically say, hey, it comes in a box. The company gives it to the hospitals for free. So now hospitals and university centers from all over the world say, I would like to do a study on immunotherapy. Can you give it to me? Diabetes, Alzheimer. Right? So now there's over, I think, 30 clinical trials in either ongoing or about to start. And many of them already finished because of this, ability to make it more like a medicine.
What do you think the possible effects could be on aging? Do we have any ideas whether this actually increases potential for human longevity, or does it just make people healthier within the same lifespans?
Yeah, so I cannot talk about it, but the paper is accepted, so it's going to be published pretty soon on biological age, and so we'll leave it at that. But let's just say in mice, it increases the lifespan, increases health span, reduces tumors, increases cognitive health. Then the possibilities are certainly of a significant. I would say the possibility is a major increase in health span. So not necessarily how long you live, but how healthy you live. And I would say a significant increase in lifespan. And I'm saying possibility because it's just you can predict, but you cannot know, right? So nobody's can do a longevity study on humans. You can use these biological clocks, and that's what we've been using. Some of them are epigenetic clocks, and some of them are blood markers clocks. And so that's what we've been using. It's what we're going to publish on. And but so far we can just tell you a mouse lives longer with this fasting mimicking diet cycles. And we can also tell you a mouse that had a terrible diet. So we took mice, we give them a high fat, high calorie, high sugar diet, and they become big. And then we take the same mice, the same diet, and once a month for 5 days, we give them the fasting mimicking diet. And the ones on the bad diet, they live a lot shorter. They have high cholesterol. They have heart dysfunction, and of course they're obese. And if we give them when we gave them once a month the fasting-mimicking diet, they went back to all the levels of a normal mouse on a normal diet and a fairly healthy diet, right? So that was surprising, and we're not advertising that people should have a bad diet and do then the fasting-mimicking diet. But it was very interesting that how powerful it was to just once a month, even though 26 days a month or whatever, 25 days a month, they will have a bad diet. The 5 days of a vegan, very healthy fasting-mimicking diet were sufficient to reverse almost all the problems that we saw in the bad diet group.
I've read a little bit about calorie restrictive diets and people living continuously on these very restricted diets because they've shown in worms that they double the lifespan, and people want to double the lifespan of humans potentially by going on to these very strict calorie reduced or calorie restricted diets. But I don't know if you'd really want to do that. You do want to enjoy your food once in a while. And so the idea of intermittent fasting, I think, appeals to a lot of people who want to take advantage of the food that's available some of the time or even most of the time. And so I think it's good news that we're finding that this actually has such health benefits if that turns out to be the case. I think that's a great selling feature of this, and we'll make it very popular. Is it are we deceiving ourselves? Is it real? I mean, there's potential for bias if a diet does something we want.
I mean, this, what I just mentioned for mice, we published a 100-patient clinical trial in 2017 on people, and we saw very much the same, meaning the people that had the worst baseline, so they were high cholesterol, high blood pressure, high fasting glucose, they did by far the best, and many of them returned to their normal level or normal range, right? So now we completed 2 trials on diabetes, and the good news is it's not me, it's people that did it independently. And sometimes, for example, in at least one of the studies on diabetes, I think they were trying to prove the opposite. I think they were trying to say, let me show you, because you know what they did in Germany? It was the fasting-mimicking diet against the Mediterranean diet for 5 days, right? So I don't know. They never told me, but I think part of the hypothesis was like, okay, let's show that, you can just do any healthy diet for 5 days a month and it'll be as good as the fasting-mimicking diet. And sure enough, it was not, right? So the fasting-mimicking diet took down the A1C, and it reduced drug use, and it was 7 times more than this cycle of a Mediterranean diet, right? So I think that there is a lot of clinical trials now, and I just mentioned some, but I think it's many that have been carried out. Even the cancer ones, for example, there was one of prostate cancer in Ireland, and they also looked at the effects on lots of different markers, and so they're pretty consistent effects on all these markers. So I would say that the metabolic effects and the sort of aging effects and aging markers effects are real. They're extremely unlikely to change. Now, we'll keep looking for, let's say, autoimmunities and cancer and Alzheimer. And there's a lot of work. We don't know. We're still early to know, how much can this go after dysfunctional systems, right? And, so what about a dysfunctional brain? Can it make it younger? How much younger can it make it? Can it reduce inflammation? So in mice, absolutely, we've shown it, we published it, but what about people? So there's a lot of work to be done, but I think it's here to stay, particularly because we've done it the hard way. Let even the competitors test it, and if they show that it doesn't work, okay, we'll keep on testing it, maybe improving it, and get to versions that hopefully are even safer and even more effective.
I interviewed on a previous interview Dr. Tracy Mann, who runs the Diet Lab, and she was very skeptical of just about any diet. She said, diets don't work for weight loss, and I think her statement was mainly concerning weight loss? Like in the short term, a diet will reduce your weight, but then your body adapts to the lower calorie intake and forces you back up in weight. And typically after 2 years, you gain back all the weight that you lose. What do we know long term about this intermittent fasting approach? Can people keep it up? Does it reduce weight in the long run, or is it mainly just the health effects that you're looking at?
Yeah, so I think that historically, if you look at like 50 years ago, when neurobiology started, right, people would say, yeah, this is a crazy field, why would you study neurobiology? The brain is just it's too difficult to understand this, right? Now neurobiology is one of the hottest fields, and of course we know little, but we're starting to know a lot about the brain and how it functions, et cetera, et cetera. The same was true for food and nutrition, right? It was always like, it's a lot, thousands of ingredients, tens of thousands of genes, right? They sort of meet each other, and then people say, you know what? It's crazy, don't even study that. Why would you study that? Now it's changing, right? Now we're starting to have, multi-omics, metabolomic, genomic, transcriptomic, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have the molecular biology, and then we have, so I think what people in the old, let's say, groups don't realize is this is changing very rapidly, right? And sure, absolutely. So historically, if you just think you're gonna, starve somebody or reduce calorie restrict them, and then hope that person is gonna stay there for the rest of their life, good luck, right? Why is that? Well, there's biology there, and now we're starting to understand that biology. So most people that I talk to, I speak at medical conference all the time, they're not aware of, this thrifty mode. What does that mean? That if you reduce your calorie long enough, then your body goes into a low metabolism mode, right? And if it goes into a low metabolism, and why is it going to a low metabolism mode? It's because it's trying to regain the muscle mass that they lost, right? It doesn't really care about that fat that much, but it cares about the muscle. So when you undergo this restriction, severe restriction, your muscle is reduced, and the body is like, it's telling your brain, eat, because I want that muscle back. I want the lean body mass back. So my point is that as we're learning all of this, and we can start, so for example, the Mediterranean diet or any diet cause a lot of lean body mass loss, but the fasting-mimicking diet does not, right? In fact, the fasting-mimicking diet is now, we have evidence, even in muscle, and we already published that years ago, evidence for these stem cells being activated, right? And so undergoing cycle. So now, not only we don't affect lean body mass, and this is like 4 trials, all showing the same, but we may be also pushing the stem cells in the muscle to be activated. We don't know yet, but certainly that's what it looks like in multiple systems, at least in the mouse. So so the point is, yes, the old sort of way, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just telling you to eat less. It doesn't work. In 2 years, you're gain the weight. If you use the right strategies and you understand the molecular aspects of it, and then also psychology and the team, right? So we have 4 foundation clinics, and we have teams of molecular biologists. We're starting to introduce psychologists, and we have the dietitian and nutritionist. And so if you go to somebody and you say, eat less, of course they're going to regain weight. If you have a team that follows that person, you have a program and you follow them, we have long-term efficacy, right? So 2 years, 3 years later, they're doing very well. Many of them, they used to have diabetes and they're now off the drugs or hypertension drug. They're off the drugs and they reduce weight, but more importantly, off drugs and now healthy, right? So I think that I always say, in the United States or in Europe, it's like saying, I want children to be educated, but I don't want to build schools and I don't want to pay the teachers, right? So when you look at people's health, and forget going to the doctor and getting lots of drugs, that's very expensive and that's working, right? And okay, right? In some cases, you need that. What's absent, completely absent, is the team that is reimbursed and that is there for you to say, hey, I understand you. I understand you're hungry. Let's work with you. I understand you like sugar. whatever it is, right? And that's what our nutritionists do. And if you have that kind of support, psychological support, but you also have the method, right? Because you can have all the psychological support in the world. If you don't know that you enter a thrifty mode, you don't know which amino acids are controlling the switch, you're going to have a problem because you're still fighting a very, very tough enemy. And so I think you have to have the knowledge, the molecular knowledge, the physiology knowledge, but then you have to have the team, and that's got to be reimbursed, and then it will work, and then it will be permanent, right? And very few patients that we follow, go back to their original weight.
Oh, okay. Well, that's very interesting. And I would have to talk to Dr. Mann again and see if she's reviewed the prolon diet. In terms of putting your money where your mouth is, what is your diet like? How do you, as the expert on this, what do you eat? Do you fast intermittently 3 or 4 times a year? Do you have 12-hour fasts every day? What's your recommendation for the people that believe in this?
Yeah, so I do it all, and I'm not just saying it, I actually do. So I do 12 hours every day. So fasting, 12 hours of eating. I don't eat lunch Monday through Friday. So I have coffee, an American coffee for lunch. And that's my lunch with sugar, by the way. I do put like one little envelope of sugar in it. And I always hate it when people the sugar became the devil, right? And that's really a big problem, right? Looking at sugar is the fuel of the human body, right? So of course you can make lots of sugar, lots of starches, the devil, fine. But somehow we turn that into the sugar itself now become the devil. So I put one teaspoon or whatever of sugar in my coffee. I love it like that. And that's absolutely no negative effect. In fact, we argue sometimes, there's a lot of people that complain, I eat some of the soups in our fasting-mimicking diet and it spikes my sugar. It does not matter. What matters is your insulin resistance. So I put sugar in my lunch and my coffee lunch. And then I do a fasting mimicking diet, maybe like once or twice a year. I just find the moments where, I need it for whatever reason. It might be, my blood pressure is getting too high or my glucose, fasting glucose are getting too high. So, and consider that already in my 30s, I have familial hypertension. So a lot of members of my family have hypertension, and I had it and just gone. And then high cholesterol, and I had it, and since then it's been gone, right? So so I follow my own advices. I have a what I call the longevity diet. We didn't talk about that, but it's I spend a lot of time putting together what people that get to 100 eat, and what the mouse studies and what the epidemiological studies, and so put what I call 5 pillars of longevity together and came up with this longevity diet, which is a fish plus vegan diet. And so I very religiously follow that. And so I have maybe fish 2 to 3 times a week, and 3 fish meals, low mercury, and then the rest of it is lots of legumes and lots of vegetables. I take maybe a multivitamin every 3 or 4 days as I preach my book.
Very interesting. Well, I hope that works out for you and for everyone who's listening. I think that's great advice to follow the advice of a doctor who's an expert in longevity. So I really appreciate you coming on the show to chat with us. This has been very enlightening. Learned a lot. And I might have to try some of this fasting and see how it does for myself. It seems like the evidence is suggesting that this does have benefits, and I could probably fast intermittently. I don't think I could do a calorie reduced diet all across the board, but intermittently, I think I could maybe do a little wind sprint. that seems doable. And from what I've read online from people who have tried it, you can get through it, even if you're not used to it. So thanks for coming on and chatting with us.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And sharing your wisdom with us, for spending the time. If you'd like, I'll send you a Rational View t-shirt so that you can remember.
And it looks good. Absolutely. I was about to ask you. Yeah.
You can remember your time with us. So thank you very much, Dr. Longo. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Thanks for listening.